Hello. So we are on day 12 of gestation, which means fertilization took place 12 days ago, which puts us around day 26 of a 28-day cycle. Mom doesn't yet know that she is pregnant because she hasn't missed the cycle yet. The cycle is still 2 days to go. As we can see here, the embryo, which is the structure here, has already been implanted within the uterine wall. This is the endometrium here, and it's completely closed. There's like a plug where the entry wound was, and now the embryonic structure is completely buried under the surface. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at an embryo with 3 cavities: the amniotic cavity here, and the what used to be the blastocystic cavity, or the blastocele, is now called the primary umbilical vesicle, and within the trophoblast here started another cavity that will actually dominate and become the main cavity here, which we will call the gestational sac. Okay, what is this? This here is the syncytial trophoblastic layer that is becoming larger and invading more and more, deeper and deeper into the uterine wall, breaking into blood vessels and glands, as we talked before. So what I want to emphasize now is that those syncytial trophoblastic cells, the nuclei will be here, okay, they will be producing an important hormone called HCG. Okay, so remember, this is day 12, maybe all the way to day 14. They will start secreting this signal, which is targeting the corpus luteum that is left back in the ovary, where the ovum was before ovulation. And if you recall, or you can look it up, the corpus luteum is actually a gland that is supposed to produce estrogen and progesterone during the second half of the cycle. It will stop producing those hormones if no pregnancy takes place. But if pregnancy takes place, those syncytial trophoblasts will secrete HCG that will circulate in the blood and go all the way to the corpus luteum to tell it to continue producing these hormones throughout the first part of the second trimester to support the embryo. Anyway, all of this is background to what we really want to focus on. We want to focus on the structure in the middle here. This here is going to become the embryo. This is the only part that will become the human body. And as we said in the last video, it is a 2-layer disc like just exactly like a coin with 2 faces, a face to the back and a face to the front, or the bottom and the top. The layer on the top is the epiblast, and the layer on the bottom here is the hypoblast. So epiblast and hypoblast. Those are not the ectoderm and the endoderm. Those are still precursors to these layers. And just to get it out of the way, the germ layers that we all know, the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, most of them are actually coming from the epiblast, this layer on the top here. While the hypoblast will contribute to the endoderm, but it will not make the whole thing. Okay, so most of the embryo is actually coming from the epiblast. Even as early as this stage that we are now, you can tell which way would be the cranial end or the rostral end of the embryo, and which side will be the tail, because there would be an area of thickening that I didn't show here. Some cells will be taller on one side here at one spot. We call that the precordial plate. Believe it or not, this would be the future site of an oral cavity. So we know that when you see this, and you won't be able to see it unless with an electron microscopy probably, that this side would be the front or the top of the embryo, and this side would be the tail. So what do we have now? We have a coin with two faces, a face to its back called the epiblast, and a face to its front or the ventral part is the hypoblast. And we have a rostral end and a caudal end or a tail end, as we will see in the next slide. So these two here are actually the actual disc, actually a model of it. And I want to remind you that by this time the mom can do the pregnancy test, which is basically measuring the HCG level or detecting whether or not you have HCG in your blood, which means the embryo is implanted and the in situ trophoblasts are producing HCG. But just remember, I want you to connect those two together. The coin that has two faces, the disc that has two layers, and the pregnancy test. So just tell yourself that when I'm doing the pregnancy test, I'm looking for that coin, if I have the coin or not. Okay. So as I mentioned, it has the epiblast layer and the hypoblast layer. And most of the ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm are going to be coming from the epiblast layer. But I want to point your attention to something actually interesting. Now, can you just imagine that this disc is almost two-dimensional? It's not three-dimensional yet. You can fit it on a surface. It barely has any thickness to it. So the first thing that will point in the direction of forming a three-dimensional object is having some kind of orientation. Which side is which? So as I mentioned, there will be a thickening in the hypoblastic layer here at some point, forming the precordial plate. So this side we know that this side will be the head, and this side would be the tail, for example. Okay, so now we have head and tail, and we have sides, one side here and one side here, but we don't have a thickness yet. It's still two-dimensional. So along with this precordial plate that shows, the disc starts elongating along this axis. So now you have axis. You have a cranial-caudal axis. Okay, so now you know that this side here is the head and this side would be the tail. But again, it is still two-dimensional. What is this? This is the primitive node. This is a depression that you can see on the epiblastic layer, and this is the primitive streak. Another depression here along the midline, supposedly the midline, and it goes caudal to the primitive node. This actually is more like a waterfall of cells. So cells from the surface here, they grow and fall down that cleft, and they form the thickness between the two layers. Like they will keep migrating from the surface like a waterfall through that cliff, and they will form the three germ layers, the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm, as we will see. So I don't think you can appreciate that this now is thicker. Okay, so we have, actually it doesn't really show that well, but this here is the ectoderm, this here is the mesoderm, and this here is the endoderm. All of these cells are coming from, or most of them are coming from that groove, where the cells from the surface migrate through that groove and coming down to form those three layers. The hypoblast, that was the bottom layer or the ventral layer, is actually part of the endoderm. What is this here? We're not going to talk about this now, but this is the neural plate, and this is the neural groove. This structure will form the precursor of the central nervous system, and this is the precordial plate. And in the next session, we will discuss how this part will develop, which is basically the head and neck.